Hello everyone and welcome back. In the last video, we started our Paypool smart contract. We created our data section with the events and some data, and finally we created the modifiers. And in these modifiers, we used two functions that we said we haven't created yet. And now in this lesson, we are going to create these functions. Let me create another part that let's say this internal functions, since we are just going to use these functions internally. And the first function will be, let's say, hasAllowance is the parameter. We are going to have user. It's going to be internal view function. It's going to return a boolean. So let's see what's happening here. Our hasAllowance function is going to take one parameter, a user address, and we are going to check if this address has allowance or not. It's going to be an internal function because we are only going to use this inside the smart contract. It's going to be a view function because we are just going to read some data but not alter any data. And finally, it's going to return either true or false, which is a boolean. Now, inside this, we are going to say return allowances user is bigger than 0. So if the allowances user is bigger than 0, then it means we gave some allowance to the user. Because if we just give an address in this allowances, and if this address is not in this allowances, right-hand side will be 0. And if the user has retrieved their allowance, then again we are going to reset their allowance to 0. So in both cases, the allowance will be 0. So if we check if it's bigger than 0, then we are checking if we gave the allowance or not. And we are directly returning this here. And now, as you can see, we got rid of the first error. Now let's create the function canDeposit. And we are going to take an address here. Let's say depositor. It's going to be an internal view function, and it's again is going to return a boolean. So we are going to do the same thing, but now we are not going to retrieve it from a mapping, but we are going to retrieve it from an array, and it's going to be a little different. Now here, I'm going to create a for loop, and inside this for loop, let's say we are going to say uint I equals 0. So it's going to start at 0, and we are going to say while I is smaller than the deposit addresses length and I++. Now we are going to go through the array and we are going to see if we can find this deposit address and say if deposit addresses I is equal to the depositor that we got as the parameter, then we are going to say return true. But if we go through the whole array with this for loop and we cannot find any deposit addresses that is equal to the depositor that we got as a parameter, then we are going to return false. Now we have created our internal functions. And if we look at our code, currently we don't need to create any let's say query functions, because since our total balance is public, we can actually get the getter function for this total balance, and the same for the owner. And since these the data structures, the array and the mapping also are public, and let's make this public, we can also get these information automatically as we are getting this getter functions automatically from Solidity. So we don't need to create any functions to get these from outside of the contract. And since they are public, we can also access them from the contract. And we created our two internal functions that we made use of, and we are going to continue with our execute functions. During this road, if we're going to need some other data retrieval process for the front end or the outside world, let's say, then we are going to come back and create a query function. But for the time being, it looks like we don't need to create any query functions. And for that reason, we are going to create our execute functions. But since I want to make this section by section, in the first part we created the data section, now we created the internal functions. Let's go to the third lesson where we are going to create the execute functions. So this will be all for this lesson. Thank you very much, and I will see you on the next one.